You know, sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected places. Today, we're going to connect a 2,500-year-old military text with a comment from a modern revolutionary. And trust me, what they teach us about true wisdom is probably not what you're thinking. All right, so let's just jump right in. This is a quote from Mao Zedong. Yeah, that Mao Zedong, one of the most successful military minds of the 20th century. And he literally wrote this in the margins of a history book. Military books do more harm than good. It's better to read less. I mean, come on, that sounds completely backwards, doesn't it? A master of war saying you should read less about war? It's a huge contradiction, and we've got to figure it out.
So, that's the big puzzle we're tackling today. Why on earth would a guy who lived and breathed strategy tell people to lay off the strategy books? It just doesn't add up. And to get to the bottom of it, we need to rewind the clock, way back, before Mao, to the exact story he was reading when he wrote that note.
To really get what Mao was saying, we've got to look at the story that got him thinking in the first place. It's a classic cautionary tale, about the huge difference between knowing all the answers in a book and actually knowing what to do out there in the real world.
So probably the most famous example of this kind of armchair general is a guy named Zhao Kuo from the Warring States period in China. This dude could recite military classics backwards and forwards. He could even outdebate his own legendary father on strategy. But, and this is a big but, when they actually gave him command of an army, he stuck to the textbook so rigidly, so predictably, that he marched 400,000 of his men straight into a trap. They were totally wiped out. It's the perfect example of knowing all the words to the song but having absolutely no rhythm.
Okay, so that brings us to the guy who actually triggered Mao's comment. His name was Liu Sun, a general from a later period. And just like Zhao Kuo, he was famous for being a bookworm. He'd read all the military classics and even bragged that he had, get this, 100 plans per step. He was the poster child for book smarts. But here's the kicker. His enemies saw that not as a strength, but as a fatal weakness.
And the trap they set was just brilliant. It shows you exactly what happens when rigid theory meets clever, real-world thinking. See, Li Sheng's opponent, a guy named Li Kunsu, had him totally figured out. He knew Li Sheng was predictable, a by-the-book kind of guy. So what does he do? He fakes a massive retreat. Now Li Sheng is under pressure from his own emperor to score a win. So he sees the enemy fleeing and, well, he throws all his textbook caution out the window and orders a full-on attack. He thought he was chasing a beaten army, but he was actually walking right into an ambush.
And this is the moment of truth. When Li Kunshu's army suddenly turns around and springs the trap, what does our 100 plans per step general do? Does he have a clever countermove? Nope. He's just shocked. He literally shouts out, "The Prince of Jin is still here," as if he just couldn't believe it. All his book knowledge, all those plans, they were completely worthless because they couldn't adapt. His enemy didn't follow the script, and his entire army paid the price.
So this really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? We're talking about two totally different kinds of knowledge. On one hand, you've got that rigid textbook knowledge, the stuff that guys like Zhao Kuo and Liu Shen had. It makes you predictable, and in a fight, predictable is dead. But on the other hand, you have real, practical battlefield wisdom. That's the ability to be flexible, to adapt, to apply the principles in a way that actually lets you win. And that's the context from Mao's little note in the margin.
Now, here's the really wild part. The answer to Liu Sun's whole problem, the secret to real wisdom, was actually written down 2,500 years before his time, and it was probably in one of the very books he claimed to have mastered, Sun Tzu's The Art of War.
You see, Sun Tzu wasn't just writing a simple how-to guide. He was describing a certain kind of person, an ideal commander who has a deep, profound understanding of conflict. He calls this person the general who knows war. And he says this general is literally the master of the people's fate, the person who decides if the nation is safe or not. I mean, the stakes could not be higher.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty of this phrase, Zhi Bing Zhizheng. The key character we need to look at is Zi. Now today, it just means to know, like knowing a fact. But back in Sun Tzu's time, in classical Chinese, Zhi was basically the same thing as Ji, which means wisdom. So this is a huge distinction. Sun Tzu isn't talking about a general who's just memorized a bunch of stuff. He's talking about a general who possesses a deep, intuitive wisdom about conflict itself.
So what does this wise general actually do? Well, there's someone who's mastered the fundamental laws of a fight, but they can apply them in a totally flexible way. They're not just following the playbook, they're writing a new one for every single battle. They don't gamble, they engineer victory. It's the polar opposite of our guy Liu Shen, who's basically a prisoner of his own books.
Okay, so now that we have this idea of Sun Tzu's wise general in our heads,
Let's circle all the way back to Mao's strange comment and see if we can finally figure out what he really meant.
And this is where the plot thickens, because it turns out that first quote we saw was only half the story. See, when Mao was reading about the failure, Liu Shun, he wrote, "Better to read less." But then he reads about a different general from the same time period, a successful and resourceful guy named Liu Renshan. And next to his story, Mao writes something else entirely. He writes, "Being roughly versed is okay. Too much is unhelpful and harmful."
That phrase, roughly versed, in Chinese, it's Lue Tang, that's the key to the whole thing. It doesn't mean being ignorant or not reading at all. It means you get the soul of the text. You understand the big ideas, the core principles, without getting lost in memorizing every little rule. It's about knowing the why behind the what.
And boom, there it is. The message is crystal clear. Mao was never against reading. He was against how people read. He was warning everyone not to just swallow information whole, because then it becomes a cage, trapping you in rigid thinking, just like a trapped Liu Xin. The real goal is to digest your knowledge, break it down, internalize it, and turn it into a flexible tool. That's how knowledge becomes wisdom.
Okay, our last section. Because let's be real, this whole lesson isn't just about ancient generals and dusty books. This exact same struggle between rigid theory and real-world wisdom happens every single day in pretty much any field you can think of.
When you boil it all down, it comes to a pretty simple but powerful idea. Theory plus practice equals wisdom. Theory gives you the blueprint, right? The foundation. But it's useless until you combine it with practice, with real-world experience, with getting your hands dirty, with failing and trying again. You absolutely need both if you want to become that wise general in whatever it is you do.
And you see this play out everywhere. I mean, think about business. The real game changers, the big shot entrepreneurs, they didn't just follow their MBA textbooks to the letter. No way. They understood the core ideas so well that they could invent new ways of doing things. Or think about a great software developer who comes up with an elegant solution that's not in any coding manual. It doesn't matter if it's art, technology, or sports. True mastery is never about just memorizing the rules. It's about having the wisdom to know exactly when and how to break them.
So, let me leave you with this to think about. In your own life, in your own field, what are you doing? Are you just reading the book, just collecting facts and following the instructions? Or are you really learning how to win? Are you taking that knowledge, testing it, breaking it, and reforging it into the kind of real, flexible wisdom that actually leads to success?